Welcome everyone to another Sales Hacker webinar. My name is Scott Barker, Head of Sales and Partnerships at Sales Hacker. So this is going to be a good one today, and we're diving into 5 ways to shorten your time to revenue. So it's all about, speed to sale. And before I introduce my 2 great guests, just a few housekeeping matters quickly. We will be recording this session. So if you have to jump off or you want to share this out with a colleague, please, we'll be sending it out, so no worries. This will be a Q&A style, so we're just going to be chopping it up, having a conversation today. I'll be grilling these 2 gentlemen with some questions, but we want to keep this super interactive, so go to the questions feature, ask relevant questions throughout, and we will try to get to as many as possible. But yeah, hop on right now. Let us know your name, title, where you're from. Maybe we'll do a couple shout outs. And you may have seen when we did the promotion for this webinar, this was originally intended to have Jenna Dorman, VP of Sales over at Vision Critical. Neither of these guys look like Jenna at all. But,
a little more facial hair, just a bit.
Just a little bit. But since our guests, our guests are real practitioners that are, still in the role. So sometimes things come up, and unfortunately, Jenna had to do some last-minute travel for work. But we are super lucky that Sales Hacker has some great friends, and we were able to snag some amazing guests in Pete Kazanji and Farland Dowell. Pete and Farland, welcome.
Yo.
Thanks, Scott. Hello, everyone.
Awesome. So we're pumped to have you both. Thank you for agreeing to do this, on such short notice. But I always love to, give a little bit more color, for the audience's sake. So Pete, you're a serial founder, seasoned early stage SaaS exec, advisor, investor. You founded TalentBin, which is like a talent search engine and recruiting CRM. You exited that to Monster Worldwide, which is insane. I've heard you refer to yourself as an accidental early stage sales leader, which is funny. And you've definitely got the scars to prove it. And before that, I believe you worked at VMware, and then most recently founded a self-HR tech company in the performance management category. And you've been a long-time contributor on our blog, and your articles always get a ton of attention. So thank you for that.
Yeah, you bet. My pleasure. Yeah, probably the definite like accidental sales leader that kind of like found himself kind of like fitting into the role of sales operations. I come from a product management and product marketing background, and when I was the first like sales rep at TalentBin, founder sales rep at TalentBin, and then sales manager and then sales leader, had to learn selling like the hard way, but kind of with a process-oriented mindset. And so that kind of just like trended me naturally into process-oriented, highly analytical, highly metrically driven, go-to-market, which then kind of led me to starting the modern sales community, so the nation's largest sales operations, leadership, and enablement community. So I just love to geek out on making sales organizations more efficient, optimizing them, and and so that's why I can talk about this stuff all day long.
I love it, and that's exactly what we're going to make you do today. Awesome, and over to Farland. So you're a sales pro and leader yourself, and you bring really a comprehensive approach to repeatable revenue. You have 15 plus years of experience in early stage B2B companies. You're the VP of Sales at Rainforest QA. Increased ARR from 300K to 10 million ARR. Increased ACV from 10K to 100K, and built a 25-person sales team that continues to grow. So super impressive. And in the past, you've held positions at the VP of Sales at Upsite. Most recently consulted for a number of companies, including Replicated, Test AI, Cloudless. So again, just a wealth of knowledge in you, and you're interested in helping teams find product market fit and scale rapidly, while avoiding all the common mistakes that companies do tend to make, unfortunately.
All the common mistakes. Yeah, thank you very much for that. I appreciate it. I actually started my career in product and was in product for about 6 years, and then couldn't resist the calling to sales much longer, and transitioned it circa 2008,
Yeah.
um, with Google and Google Apps. And so this was folks talking about the cloud and talking about SaaS. And I started selling this. We were basically going into pretty large organizations, ripping out their Exchange servers, putting in Google Apps,
Mhm.
and I loved it. I just thought the cloud and SaaS was really cool, and I've been in it ever since with a couple of different companies. So I'm definitely on the operator side. This is really my first foray in the last few months in consulting, and mostly B2B enterprise SaaS. I would say actually exclusively, and really
Mhm.
working with deal sizes 60 to 120K up to 200K, just to give you an idea of where I'm coming from. Not a lot of transactional sales, mostly consultative sales. So we can
Yeah.
get a little bit more into that, but it's good to have that context. So yeah, thanks for that.
That's great. Yeah, thanks for that further context. And what do you think that that inevitable draw of sales, where does that come from? Are we all just control freaks and want to just own revenue, or what's that all about? What was the draw for you?
Uh, I can't quite say. Sales has just always followed me around, and
Yeah.
I've had luck and success and some natural instincts for it. Maybe I
Yeah.
talked myself out of a lot of trouble that I got into when I was younger, and was able to kind of navigate conversations in a in a way where, if I had to get out of trouble, I could pull out other stops and figure it out. And sales isn't dissimilar. There's a lot of instinct. There's a lot of emotional intelligence. Uh,
Love
but
it.
um, but yeah, I don't know.
Love it. Cool. Okay, so let's quickly go to the community who we have joining us. So we have Carl in the house from Exton, Pennsylvania. Looks like we've got Tyler Lousy from Boston. So Boston's in the house. Rashida Clark, leading sales over at Labor Sync. So thanks for joining us, guys. Make sure you ask questions throughout. So let's jump into the topic today. 5 ways to shorten your time to revenue. Shortening that loop from prospecting to signing on the dotted line. Mark Benioff has that quote. Speed is the new currency of business. And we've got this insane increase in competition. We've got technology now helping us accomplish more in less time than ever before. So let's first off, let's talk about the importance of decreasing that time it takes to get to revenue. Apart from the obvious, why should this topic of productivity and efficiency be top of mind for all sales professionals? And Pete, you want to kick us off with this one?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think that like it's funny when I was approaching this, I was thinking about this from the standpoint of like compressing time to revenue from like first demo or like when somebody signs or things like that. But now that you made that comment about the Mark Benioff quote, I've kind of like enlarged the scope of thinking about it. And I do agree that like speed is becoming more important because I think that the consumer expects it, like the user expects it, uh,
Mm-hmm.
crossed with the fact that because there's so much information available, like when somebody's ready to buy or like at the point where they have the need,
Yeah,
then like they're like that window is shortening because like they've done so much research and they're kind of like way down the funnel to the point where like they're getting close to they're in the consideration stage as opposed to like further up. So
yeah,
I think that's one driver that makes it such that speed's more important is because like the window when somebody's like ready to buy and persuadable, which is kind of what sales does,
yeah,
is shortening. And then I think the other thing too, and I'm sure Farland thinks about this a lot too, because like in early stage organizations, like the faster you can get money, the better off you are as an organization, because as SaaS organizations, what we're in the business of doing is scaling up such that we can um, you know like take our zero marginal cost product, whether it's software or whatever, and like get more money for it. And so the way that we do that is through like acquiring more salespeople who are successful. And the faster we can get them successful and like spending money back into the organization, the faster we can grow without having to sell more of the company to VCs and then diluting ourselves. So I think that like it's a very important topic. Like that's more onboarding and getting people to success, but it's also things as basic as like, can you get people paying you up front? Can you get people like, paying you in 30 days as opposed to on a quarterly payment cycle and things like that? So, speed impacts organizations across the board there.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. And Farland, any further thoughts on that?
Yeah, I've got a couple of fun random ones for you. So this for the individual contributors out there that have quotas on their heads right now. The golden rule for me when I'm working with reps is as follows. Time kills all deals. And it is, as in everything sales, an extremely nuanced thing to say. So you might have some reps out there that are like, yes, get it closed as fast as you possibly can. But that's actually wrong. In the earlier stage of the sales cycles, I had a great mentor. He would always say to me, slow it down to speed it up. And what that means is, and I know that some folks out there have run into this scenario before, you get somebody that comes inbound that needs a quote ASAP. Rep gets on the phone with them and says, yep, great, okay, you need this, great, here's how much it's gonna cost. They're like, send me business terms, great. Two things happen after that conversation. The prospective client gets off the line and says, cool, I just got another quote to add to this list of quotes and basically, have something to match against, frankly, the vendor that I'm already halfway down the aisle with. So that's just a non-deal on his side. They're not even considering you. Now you get off the phone and what do if you're extremely junior? You hang up the phone and you run around the office pumping sunshine. This thing's coming in hot.
Yeah.
You've got your forecast meeting that they're blowing smoke up all over the place. The sales manager, VP sales, if they're very inexperienced, is like, awesome, count it, committed, and it's just a whole cluster. The problem with that is the rep didn't sufficiently slow it down and actually understand what was happening with the prospective client. And the way to do that is to do, and this is like blocking and tackling 101, a proper discovery. Hey, Mr. Client, we can definitely get you a pricing quote. Let me just kind of understand, like, where are you guys at? What are you looking for? Oh, cool. So what's the actual like pain that we're trying to solve? What's happening here? What's happening here? And really drill into it so that you can understand and you can kind of figure out where they're at. Now, it's very, very difficult to do this, and you have to have the right system in place, and that's tactical questions. But you can't be a robot and just ask 10 questions and think you're going to understand what's happening. It's much more nuanced than that, where you have to actually create a relationship. If you can, and they're probably going to be hesitant to create a relationship with you at that point, because like I said, they're already halfway down the aisle in another relationship. So you really need to understand. And if you can do the hard work within a half an hour or an hour and really drill into how that sale needs to take place, how that dance needs to be conducted, and this is you leading the prospective client, you'll actually be somewhere. So that's called slowing it down to speed it up. Now, if you sufficiently do that work in the earlier phase, watch how fast that deal closes when you get to pricing, when you get to negotiation, when you get to contract, if you've done the right things up front. So time kills all deals, and time is of the essence. But I would say the nuance there is it shouldn't always be fast.
Right. I think that's a great point. And the funny thing about, human beings is relationships and trust, it takes time. We can have all these technologies that speed everything up. And it's great if you can speed up your own sales team's, selling cadence, but we also have to think about the buyer, right? We have to make sure that your selling cycle and their buying cycle are aligned, at the same pace. So Pete, how do you make sure that your selling cadence is going to match that of your buyers, like when they're ready to buy? Because this person could come in hot, they could come in slow, and if you're just trying to push everyone through as quick as possible, you're going to turn some people off.
Yeah, I think the reason why I thought like Farland's point there was really good around, you know, doing good discovery in order to understand like where they're at, and then be like, and then so then if they're not down the funnel for you, that's cool. But this is where like being CRM excellent and process excellent comes into play. And I think that the notion of like, always be closing, gotta slam it shut, comes from an old school mindset where like the reason why you were trying to like always be closing was because you thought that if you didn't close them right then and there, like you would never have a second chance. Like, and the good news is that we have that now, like we have magical software that helps us understand like who we should be working on, what stage they're at, so on and so forth. And so I think the way that you align yourself to their buying process and their need is by having faith in your process. Sorry, having a process, being good at it, like adhering to it, having good analytics on it, and then trusting that. So if they're like to Farland's point, if they're up here and and you're trying to be like, all right, cool, like we got to get this going, and like you're trying to power close them and do all sorts of funky stuff like, oh, well, this discount's going away, or we only have this many CS reps, and like we got to get you lined up, or else like it's going to be next quarter until we can get you in, and like all sorts of those like like closing sleight of hand things. Sometimes that can work, but not in a market where you have lots of competitors and lots of alternatives. And so like you're just ultimately, because you're trying to power close them, you're going to end up like not closing them. You're going to hurt your win rate. Whereas if you are able to better align to their needs and say, oh, okay, like where are we really at here? Oh, okay, cool. You're at this stage right here. Well, the good news is I can put you in that stage. And because I know that we have a recurring cadence wherein I know that I'm going to loop across my pipeline and make sure that I'm paying attention to people, and I'm not overloaded. I don't have 100 ops, many of which are bullshit. Instead, I have like ones that are legit, that I have faith that I can loop across and be on top of. That's fine. Yeah. Like I can trust the process and know that when I loop back across this next Wednesday, I'm going to be able to check in appropriately and what have you. So I think that like the way that you enable yourself to slow down, to speed up, to quote Farland, is by having a good process and adhering to it. Because otherwise you're like, oh my God, it's gonna disappear. So I better try to power close them right now.
Right. Yeah. Makes total sense. That's some great points there. And so how important then, let's take it back quickly. How important is the role of onboarding or training in overall productivity of your team? Because that's, I think, in my opinion, that's got to be where it starts, right? Other than having a great process, like you said, Pete. So Farland, do you want to take a stab at that one?
Yeah, I think onboarding and training is great. Obviously, I don't think we're going to sit folks down at a laptop and say, figure it out. Right, but
some orgs do,
and actually,
I've been part of those.
And actually, sure, training and onboarding, and at Salesforce, it's the military, and it should be. That's an organization that's truly, and this word is thrown around so much, at scale. They are a sales organization truly at scale, and their onboarding is meticulous, and they know exactly what they're doing. If you're in a sales team sub 10 AEs and you have a 50-page playbook, that is
much
worse than a paperweight. I mean, it's useless. Nobody reads it, and nobody learns from it. It's a total waste of time. You've just checked a totally useless box. Now, you can certainly have pieces of a playbook you can have a sales process that Pete very well spoke to, and that's exactly right. I mean, what kind of sales process are you running? What is your ideal customer profile? What do those case studies look like of successful customers? There's a few modules in there that are going to be very helpful and instructive. But to the point of sitting a rep down with a laptop and saying, figure it out, it's actually what I've found, and again, this is a little bit earlier stage. We're not speaking about an organization that's truly at scale. Is that when you sit a rep down to do the theory and learn and absorb, it's very, very difficult to do that. What's actually much more effective is day 1, 2, or 3, get a rep on the phone with a lead that's not really a target and is not really going to be a buyer, but they're interested in the product and they want to see what the product can do. And the rep is going to fumble through that. But then when a rep sits down and looks at a few modules of your playbook and your process and your pitch deck and your demo, they're like, oh, that's what that is. Oh, I could have used, oh, now I see that. And it's a much more impactful way for reps to consume and learn. I've seen reps sit down for 2 weeks and study the shit out of everything, and they get on the phone and they're starting from scratch, literally 2 weeks later. So yeah, training and onboarding for sure, but there's, as in everything, it's nuanced and there's a middle way.
Yeah. Pete, what are your thoughts on letting reps kind of fumble through or make a few mistakes in order to, get them to be, better reps in the long term?
Yeah, I mean, I think that like the way that I think about onboarding and training is, I'm a big sports guy. I grew up playing baseball and ski racing, and it's all about repetitions, right? And so to Farland's point, like reading about theory without actually like doing the push-ups, or like the metaphor that I really like is, because I grew up playing baseball, is like time in the batting cage, time in the bullpen. It's less about like, all right, I'm not going to prepare and I'm just going to get on the mound, or I'm going to get in the batter's box. Like you win there by putting in the time other places. And it's actually really kind of fascinating to see how little people do that in professional contexts. Oftentimes, because I think that people, it's uncomfortable, right? Like having somebody sit next to you and like do mock demos or mock discovery or what have you. And so what people will oftentimes do is they'll create documentation like Farland was talking about, and I think that the job is done, right, versus actually like making people do the push-ups, making them having more of like a personal trainer or like a hands-on coach approach there. And I think really making space to do that in a manager's cadence is very important. I think a lot of the times this comes down to managers not making room for the things in their calendars that are important for them to do. Frequently because managers are sales reps who have been promoted and don't think about like, okay, I used to fill my time with customer facing meetings and now I should fill my time with what exactly? And a non-trivial part of that time should be inspection and correction and essentially just like standing over somebody while they do push-ups and being like, yeah, your form's off there. Here, let me show you how how to do this push-up, or like there's a hitch in your swing here. Let me show you on the tape. Let me show you how to do that, that part of the swing instead. And so I think that that's really important. And like that's the tactical component of it. But like if you up level it a piece and say, what about onboarding? What about training? It's one of the things that's the most impactful things that you can do in order to make your organization successful. Because if you think about salespeople, so Farland and I are both here in San Francisco. It's a very expensive market. And when you bring on a sales rep, they're initially eating cash, right? You're paying them, whatever your comp plan is. Maybe you're paying them draw or what have you. And so like they're eating cash at that point, and they're not spinning money off to the organization. And so the faster you can get them but at scale, they should be spinning off 3 times their salary, 4 times their salary, their monthly salary in cash back to the organization. So the faster you can get them to go from eating cash to spinning cash, the better off you are. And if
Hmm.
you can do that in like, the usually like, the best possible is usually like 1.5 sales cycles to get somebody to full capacity. Like that's like world class. But if you're like, getting somebody to speed, we're in 2 sales cycles. So, at Rainforest, what was the deal cycle at Rainforest? It's like pretty
Like a
long, right? Like
like a
90 days or
it's like a
60?
six, it's like a 60-day average.
Yeah, so if you could get a rep up to speed 120 days in where they're like spinning off cash, that's so much better than them spinning off cash at like 180 or like 220 or what have you. So,
Right.
I mean, that's why like getting like across an organization, getting that individual compressed such that because now when they're spinning cash off, you're paying for engineers, or you take that cash that they're spinning off and now you're paying for the next group of reps that you
Yeah.
hire. Right?
Yes. Yeah. I like it. I like it. So then, what does an effective onboarding look like in your eyes? Pete, I'll go back to you on this one.
Oh, an effective onboarding? Just
Mhm.
like having it be structured, like what Farland. I think there's kind of a couple of things there. One, I think it has to be stage appropriate, which is totally what Farland said. Like over engineering it to begin with um,
Mhm.
can be problematic. Now, probably the commonest cases that you'll see there is actually the opposite case, where just like not having structure at all, because oftentimes in very early stage organizations, like the founder has like the sales playbook in his or her brain, or
Yeah.
the sales leader has the playbook in their brain. So at least like having that documented such that it can then, but again, like Farnan says, not so you can just hand it to somebody and be like, have fun, like read it,
Right.
but instead so you have like a rubric. It's like school, right? Like a syllabus that you go through together, and you're like doing the repetitions, like having the
Yeah.
appropriate level of that, and then like being intentional about it over the first whatever time period it is. Like my buddy Justin Roberts used to lead sales at Lever. They had this whole thing that they called Ramp Camp, which I thought was really cool. And I think it was like 2 weeks long. It was like very structured. They started everybody, and this was like pretty early. Like he's a former box guy, and then before that he was in Salesforce. So he had a little bit of that kind of like, larger, more scaled kind of like background. But
Yeah.
like, and then they scaled it down appropriately for Lever, but in a way that was like that made new reps feel really like they were hitting the ground running. But they didn't leave it open to like the sales managers, like, all right, figure it out, or like the sales reps, okay, figure it out. It had a syllabus, it had scheduling associated with it, and it got people up to speed in a hurry.
Got it. Makes
Yeah,
sense. And we have actually, sorry, go ahead, Farla.
just two quick, a couple quick things
Hmm.
to add there, and I can speak to late seed, early A in terms of onboarding and training. I
Yeah.
think I think having a process that is fairly simple but effective and repeatable and can be trained on is really important. And I think Pete, you said it. You've got to have that really down on paper and not in the head of sales or VP's head, right? That does not work. You have to have a process. I think above and beyond that, it's really, in forecast meetings, in deal review meetings, really drilling down and understanding where deals are, and doing coaching with the team, folks that are doing well. Okay, cool. So you've got to this stage. What are the questions you're asking here? What are the next steps there? You close this one. What were the factors for success? And really having a lot of that group learning. But I think the
Hmm.
thing that in onboarding that folks, particularly in the early stage, really overlook is, and the third and most important factor is, everybody has to have the same quality leads to be working from. And this is something that is massively overlooked, and I would say it's a huge factor in onboarding and training, and frankly for success of a rep.
And that is that just equal leads across the board. Is that like when you mentioned like day two, you jump on the phones, are they getting that same quality lead, or is that come maybe in a few weeks down the line?
That's called after like 30-day ramp.
Yeah.
That lead, and I wouldn't even call it a lead that they get on day 2, day 5, is called what
Yeah.
I call mind share. This is a developer that's clearly just looking around, kicking the tires, doesn't have budget, doesn't have authority. The company's not even a fit in your ideal customer profile. Get them on the
Got
phone
it.
with Frank and let them have a conversation and take them through some of the motions.
Got it. Makes sense. All right, so let's get back a little bit to, you know, efficiency and productivity. We discussed onboarding there at length a little bit. So what do you, both your opinions, like what should people be measuring when you talk about efficiency or productivity? What are the specific, you know, key performance indicators that you would identify when you're like, yeah, that rep, he's efficient. That rep is maybe not efficient. Whoever wants to crack at that first.
Arlen?
Yeah, thanks. I can take a general crack at that. I think speed is a component, but I would balance that with ASP, or average selling price, or ACV. Some may look at it that way, average contract value. Um, so I like to look at where you can get maximum efficiency in terms of speed, where you're also getting an optimal deal value. And at scale, there's all kinds of formulas. Earlier on, it's a little bit of gut, and some market analysis, and some just feet on the street understanding what's happening out there. So for example, at Rainforest, when I first joined, we were closing deals that were $500 a month, and we were closing them in one call that could take a half an hour. So one might say that is incredible efficiency. Like, wow. And that's true, but I thought that our product had a lot more value, and it does. There were a lot of things that we did on the go-to-market front to really increase that value. But fast forward 3, 6, 9 months, we were closing deals for $36K a year, or $3K a month, 60K a year, and then 120K a year. So we went from $500 a month to $10,000 a month. And yeah, we weren't doing one call closes, but we were able to get it to a point where we were closing them in 30 to 45 days.
Yeah, maybe it was 3 calls.
Right.
It's still, you know, 10 grand a call instead of 500 a call.
Right.
Right.
Exactly. So I think you need to balance those two vectors. And this is where the experience of frankly a good leader comes in on the revenue side to make those calls, and those are really important calls in the early days. I work with a number of earlier stage companies. Some of them are chasing after, and this kills me, these really big Fortune 500 logos. VCs love it.
Oh yeah.
They're fun to put on your website, great to chat about over drinks with your with your fellow founders, but there is no faster or slower way to put your startup into the ground than doing these deal cycles that basically go out into a year and a half, for the pot at the end of the rainbow, which is a $2 million deal. But those, in my experience, early stage, rarely come to fruition. So the reason that I say that is that's the other end of the spectrum, right? You can close them fast for a small amount. You can close them slow for a huge amount, maybe. Or there's some nuance, and as I've said before, a middle way.
Right. And Pete, it looked like you had a few things to add there.
Oh yeah, I mean, what Farland's saying is totally right. Like with early stage startups, what I advocate is like go after the mid market. I forget who. I think it actually was Mark Suster had this metaphor, and I write about. I think I stole it in my book. I wrote a book on sales for founders called Founding Sales, and I talk about when you're like ideal customer profile, there's rabbits, deers, and elephants. I think that I stole that from Mark Suster. And like the problem with like rabbits are really fast. Oftentimes they're easy to catch, but the problem is you catch them and you're like, all right, there's not much here, right? Whereas like an
You eat
elephant
them
like
in
takes
one bite.
forever.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, like elephant like takes too long or it takes a really long time. If you bring them down, you're like, oh shit, now I gotta eat this because it's like huge, right? And like and like it might fall on you and kill you and like all these things. Whereas like deer is like right in the middle. It's kind of nice, like it's a couple meals, etc. The other thing too is that like mid-market organizations have a tendency to be more modern, younger, more open to new technologies, which is oftentimes like what we're selling, as opposed to more hidebound, like and SMBs or like really 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 early startups, of course, are that they have that going on as well. But the problem with them is it's like the product hunt crowd, where it's just like a bunch of locusts show up, they register, and then they never like activate. And so I think that this is why it's really good that there are people like Farland out there in the market helping early stage startups figure this out, because I think like accelerator culture oftentimes like pulls people in the wrong direction, where it's like, hey, you've got a bunch of other people in your accelerator, you should just sell to yourself because then it'll like make your metrics look really great. Well, it turns out that like your metrics aren't very great because your reps are selling $500 deals, right? So hey, we're closing lots of like, logos, but the problem is our reps are only closing $15,000 of deals a month or $15,000 of business a month, and they're barely covering their own nut, let alone spending money off for other folks.
Right.
So I think that like being mindful of your ICP is really important there, because ICP will oftentimes cascade into things like the metrics we're talking about, like win rate and ASP. And so I think, just generally speaking, like as a sales operations person, you want to think about like your sales organization as like a machine, right? Like I like to use the metaphor of an engine, like a car engine. I mean, you have a bunch of pistons within it, right? And then all those pistons together drive horsepower. And so what you want is you want to maximize aggregate horsepower of that engine. And so if you're closing a bunch of deals but like not at a high value, ultimately like you're not pushing the organization very well. And then the reps that you have, like generally speaking, like reps selling B2B in a non-self-serve fashion, it's like you literally only have your time. You have 50 hours in a week. You can probably have 20 customer facing meetings a week is like pretty aggressive from a coordination standpoint. Like you need to have space to follow up with your pipeline and things like that. So then if you know that you only have 20 calendar slots for an AE, and it takes one call to close a $500 deal, but it takes 3 calls to close a $20,000 deals, well, just do the math. Like if you have 20 scarce calendar slots, should you be spending your time on the ones that do 5K a or 5K a meeting? Yeah, probably you should be spending. And so you can end up instrumenting this in metrics. Like ASP is a good example from an outcome standpoint. You can also have even more granular metrics like revenue per meeting, right? And then the other things that you can look at as well is precursor metrics to win rate and ASP, like average op size in the pipe. Because like we talk about like, oh, okay, do you have enough pipe coverage? Is it 3x your quota or what have you? Well, you can get even more granular than that. You can say like, what's the average size of the op in your pipe? You can kick out pipe that's BS, like that hasn't advanced the stage in some time interval, like 90 days or what have you. By the way, you should probably close those out anyway and kick them back to SDR. You can look at things like meeting conversion rate. That's a really, really good metric, is the proportion of meetings that go from first meeting to second meeting, because that, especially during onboarding and ramp, reps who don't get second dates. If you don't get a second date, you don't get a third date. And if you don't get a third date, you're not going to get married. You're not going to close the deal. So looking at the ratio of first meetings that turn into second meetings ends up being a really good precursor metric to if somebody's like doing a good job on like good discovery and good value proposition. And then like I think the other thing too on just like metrics around if someone's ramping is like because like use Rainforest as an example. I think Rainforest is awesome. I think it's a great product and the founders are great. Like 60-day sales cycle, 120-day ramp, if you're like kicking butt, okay, we're not going to have like good information as to whether or not this rep is like kicking ass for like 120 days. That's a long time to wait in order to understand that. Okay, what are the precursors we could look at? And so sometimes that's just as prosaic as like, yo, what do their activity metrics look like? Like, are they sending emails? Do they have a pulse? Right? Like, how many meetings are they having? You know, things like that. Because, like, how many reps did you guys have at Rainforest Farm? It's like 25. 10. Is that what he said?
Well, there was 25 on the sales team. It was a lot of that was outbound SDR as well.
Yeah, so like the problem is like if you have 10 people that you're responsible for, like there's no way you can keep that on your head. So like being able to use metrics in order to like be like, oh, actually you look funky, and then like dive in there as opposed to like, you know, sitting next to 10 different people for a half hour, you know, a day. That's like a lot harder to do versus like looking at metrics once a week and being like, that looks funky right there. I'm gonna dive in on Bobby because he's messed up there.
Right.
But yeah, even like more prosaic like activity metrics, those are really, because that's kind of all you got when you're in a ramp situation.
Right. Yeah, makes sense. Having those benchmarks are definitely essential, so you can like quickly diagnose what's going wrong, and then like you said, kind of just move backwards from there.
Yeah, get ahead of it.
Yeah, totally. Love it. So great points on, you know, the KPIs you want to watch out for. You know, what I really got out of that is, you know, it's impossible just to look at speed and efficiency. There's too many other variables that go along with it that that are going to affect it, because like you said, you can be closing $500 deals all day long, but if you're making more money by playing the long game with these bigger deals, then you got to take that into account. Yeah, very cool. Okay, so we've got a question from the audience. Sorry guys, you've been really engaged, but we've been in the thick of it. So let's get to one. We have Blair Carey, and she wants to know, so in addition to CRM, what other outbound tools would you recommend for an outbound team? Pete, you want to kick us off?
Sure. I mean, I think all the outbound tools are really, there's really great, powerful outbound tools. Like, you know, there's Outreach and Sales Loft that are kind of like the industry standards there. There's other ones that are doing kind of more like, you know, more cutting edge stuff around programmatic writing of content like Nova and things like that. I feel that like they're all really good, and it's less about the tool and it's more about like being thoughtful around process and identifying your ICP, identifying accounts associated with that, identifying contact objects of the correct title and persona associated with those accounts, making sure that those are loaded in an appropriate place with, you know, good outbound cadences, targeting them that are thoughtful and have good messaging and what have you. Like, it's not just like, I got to buy a tool and then do it. It's like it's a whole thing that I was just describing.
Yeah.
The good news is there are some companies that are kind of thinking about how if you're really early stage and you can't do that lift in order to get your, like, to do that whole thing, there's a company called Grow Labs that kind of does that kind of stuff like all in one. But I think that like the important thing is to realize that it's not just like a silver bullet sort of thing, but it's more about like a process and being excellent.
Definitely. I would always process then tools. Process and tools. I think too many people, especially when they're maybe more novice, they jump on these shiny tools and think it's going to be, you know, like you said, the silver bullet, and it's fortunately not. Farland, anything on your radar right now that you like?
Yeah, outbound is very near and dear to my heart, actually, and there's companies that are seeing incredible growth by leveraging proper outbound. So when a company says, "Oh yeah, our account executives are doing outbound," you're not doing outbound. Well, you're doing outbound, but that's not really an outbound process. It's not a system. If they say, "Oh yeah, we're buying lists and putting them in, dumping them into a cadence," that's outbound. It's not outbound. But anybody can do that. The cadence are somewhat nuanced. Yeah, you have to set up outreach, but that's not a real system. That's not a real process that's going to garner results in a significant way for a significant amount of time. So what Pete was saying, yeah, it starts with I would flag two things that you really have to drill into is the ideal customer profile, which Pete mentioned, and being super clear and super crisp on that, and frankly, holding people's feet to the fire. I have no problem with companies in India, but at the onset, if I have a 4-person dev shop in India, potentially not going to be a buyer for $120,000 piece of software. And you really have to be finite about what your ICP is in the onset. And then the second thing is with that ICP, your outbound reps can go out and they know where the A-list companies are that they need to target. But it's not just grabbing some positions that are in your ICP from that company. The SDRs really need to dig in and understand what is the organizational dynamic of that company, because you may be targeting a vice president of engineering, but company A doesn't have that. They actually have a VP of IT. And if you look at what that VP IT does, if they're in charge of integrations, bingo, that's your guy. And you would add that to a cadence. And I want to tell you, that is what separates SDRs that bring in 4 sales qualified opportunities a month from SDRs that bring in 12. And it's a remarkable difference. So those are two, just in terms of the grinding of that process and really how exacting you need to be. But outreach, in my opinion, is best of breed for cadence. Duck Soup's kind of cool for social touches, which helps in terms of the cadence. You should have a dialer, and you should integrate a touch, if it's not a voicemail, into your email cadence. Try Prospect is pretty cool. I think some folks use Lead IQ. Those are probably some of the main ones.
I think the thing that you like, people really have to, as Farland was talking, I was thinking about this. Like Rainforest is a great example, right? Talk about a touchy ass prospect to sell to. VPEs, IT, etc. Like they don't want to have like stupidity in their inbox, right? They already like have something against salespeople, and so like. And if you, I think this is one of the things you really have to be careful about with like the outreaches, the sales lofts, et cetera, of the world, is like you can't go around handing out AK-47s to kindergartners, right? And like it's not like it's a bad scene if you do that and you're not thoughtful about things. Like you can essentially just have like an unmanaged SDR function torch a market for you,
right?
Because like if you're going after like VPs of IT and you're sending them stupidity, and like say you get it together later on 6 months down the line, they're like, oh yeah, I remember this company. They're the ones who like carpet bombed my inbox with stupidity, spam, right? So I like there are potential real downsides to half-assing that. And maybe in some markets it's less so. Like if you're going against SMBs, whatever. Like maybe it's like less of a big deal, and it might actually be churn and burn. Whereas if you're going, like if you have a fancier go-to-market, which are the companies that Farland's been working with more recently, and like Rainforest, you have to think about the downside of pissing off those prospects.
Yeah, that's a great point. You have to, take into account your personas and how they like to actually be interacted with. Because definitely if you're throwing a VP engineering on a 9-touch cute cadence, they're not gonna be your best friend. You maybe get away with that with VP of marketing, throwing some cutesy fun stuff, maybe. But
that's right. Like did you get eaten by a hippopotamus? Breakup email, not gonna fly with a VP of engineering.
No. I don't. Can we just all agree that that's got to go from every cadence of all time? I think there should be fines for sending that email. So, like just bills you if you send it. Okay, awesome. So a few more for questions here. So I want to do this one. I'm going to keep it pretty kind of vague, so it's wherever you guys want to go with this question, but actionable things. We always want to talk about actionable things on Sales Hacker. So actionable ways that reps can move an opportunity a new opportunity to close one quicker? What have you seen work well in the past that, isn't necessarily just those kind of cheeky ways that you said, Pete, like, oh, our CS managers are overloaded. We can only onboard this many people at a time. Actual ways, moving opportunity to close one quicker. What have you seen work well in the past?
Farland, you got something?
Yeah, I mean, there's a bunch of tricks, but that has to do with the individual rep's personality. If you really can bond and create strong relationships, you have their cell phone number and you call them up and just say, hey man, listen, I know here's where we're at with the deal. We got the terms negotiated. This thing's illegal. It would really mean a lot to me if we can get this in before the end of the quarter, and you call in a personal favor. And if you've got that relationship, great. In other cases, you just need a straight up way to get somebody to open their wallet and give you money, which frankly is a very unnatural human thing to do. And so you need to give them a reason to do that. And what's that reason? Hey, like this term that we negotiated in our business terms negotiation of X discount if you did that, or waiving of an integration fee, it goes away. And that's not coming from you. This is coming from your CFO, and you really need to make that happen. But you better be sure that you're willing to walk away from that deal, because that's a very aggressive thing to do. And if you think that that's just a trick that you're going to use all the time to create an event that is made up, you better be good. You better know what you're doing. You better understand what's happening on the other side of that deal. When you are at that business terms negotiation phase of the deal, there's always going to be some give and take. But before you give anything, if you ask them, say, hey, listen, I get that, this may be too long of a term, or you can't commit to pay annually up front. When the first thing my CFO is going to ask, if I ask for this concession, and by the way, I can go to the well once for concessions, FYI, but the first thing my CFO is going to ask is, when can they sign by? And by verbally getting a commitment before you give them a give is very powerful. And if you're dealing with a deal maker, which again goes back to discovery. Pete and I could take this whole question, everything in it, back to discovery, right? But if you're actually dealing with somebody that knows how to do a deal, aka understands the dance between buyer and seller,
you know how to buy,
right? Knows how to buy, is a credible champion, they are not going to give you a sign by date and have that thing pass. That's just not how credible people do deals. This is a question that we could probably do a 3-hour webinar on, but there's a few for you. I'm sure Pete's got.
How do you win deals?
Pete's got something loaded up.
I think, I always come back to process, because that's like my steez. The way that I think about this is, and I forget who it was. I think it was actually the guys at Gong published something recently where they talked about, like, closing tactics are dead. And they talked about how it really kind of comes down to good discovery, but I think it's actually just like excellence during like every part of the funnel. And so then the question is, like, how do you, if you want to compress deal cycles, then the way to do that is to run excellent deals. Okay, cool. That sounds like really, banal. What does that actually mean? And then that kind of comes down to, are you doing a good sales process? Like, whether you're, following Sandler, like I like the notion of like upfront contracts, next actions, etc., where like everybody knows where they're at. And so anytime you have a touch base where you're like, okay, cool, like, are we still on? Are we progressing? So this is assuming we've done good discovery where we know that we've like validated need and authority or access to authority, and money. like just always like requalifying it, like each time you have an interaction, and making sure that like you're on the same page. And if you're not on the same page and they're like, okay, cool, like is this BS? Like, is this not a real deal anymore? What's the objection? Can we handle that objection? If we can, fantastic. Let's handle that objection. Like, what's blocking us from progressing? Are there anybody else who needs to be involved? Oh, there are. What are their names? Cool. Can I be the secretary and manage and organize that? Oh, I'll touch base with them. You know what? Why don't we actually just all get on a call together? Or alternatively, I'll do it. Like, I can do a parallel call with them. You're super busy. You know, I was on LinkedIn earlier. It looks like based on their titles, it might be Frank and Bobby. Are those the right people? Right, those sort of things, which just like add a little bit of proactivity. Like, well, why don't we actually just get on a call rather than you running off and saying that you're going to do that? Oh, actually, I don't want to do that. Okay, this deal's not real. Oh, actually, that's actually a really good idea, Scott. I really appreciate you being willing to be proactive and like do that project management for me, because yeah, I do have a full-time job. So just like those sort of things where there's like, it's not like assumptive closes. It's like assumptive next actions where you're just constantly like pulling things forward as much as you can. Like, oh, okay, well, like, you know, let me know. No, actually, here's a bunch of times that works for me across the next 2 weeks. Pick one, right? I think it ends up being like a lot of those little kind of like project management things. And what happens is when you execute that across like 30 open ops, in aggregate, what it's going to do is like pull things pull things closer, and then it's also going to kick out bullshit really quickly because you're going to be able to more proactively identify bullshit, and then that opens up space in your pipe to bring in non-bullshit.
Totally. Yeah, I would agree with everything there. And what I would kind of call what you're describing is like a mutual action plan that you're building, you know, together. You know, and I've always found, you know, in my career, it's much easier to ask the hard questions up front. So people will tell you when they want to sign up front, no problem. But if you wait too long to ask that question, they're going to hold their cards to their chest a little bit more. They're going to use it as kind of, you know, a negotiation tactic with you. But if you know right from the get-go, like you guys said, all comes down to discovery. You can then say, okay, if we're going to implement on this date, here is exactly who we need to meet, who needs to be bought in, and everything. And you can literally do it from dates with them. It's something that I've had lots of success with my career. And yeah, would agree. I think a ton of it is coming down to discovery, both productivity, and if you want an efficient sales cycle, do the work, you know, up front.
And like good communication. Like one of the things I find at like the end of a sales call is just like recounting action items. It's the mutual action thing you were saying, like, okay, I think these are the next actions. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do this. You're going to do that, right?
Yeah.
And you shut up, and they go, yep. And you go, cool. I'm going to email you documenting that, and I'm going to get to work on my action items. And then at like what time will your action item be done? Yeah. Because I'm going to backstop you. Like, it's not going to be open. Like, I'm going to show up.
Yeah, totally. That's a good point too. Is setting those deadlines is key to make it keep going quicker and quicker as you need. Okay, so we probably have time maybe for one more question. So let's go to the audience really quick. Sometimes we get some really like pointed questions, so I'm going to try and tease one out and make this hard for you guys. Let's see.
Farland, what is the secret to a magnificent beard? Go.
We've just all been observing. We already know just by watching him. Okay, so let's see. In a perfect world, how many outbound emails and calls would suffice on a weekly basis for a healthy pipeline? They didn't distinguish between BDR or AE. Let's go for the sake of this one. Farland, I know you hate this, but you're an AE who also has to build his own pipeline.
Yeah, I don't know. I'll give you one stat that I really like. If you're working mid-market deals and you're at kind of a 60 to about a 60-day sales cycle, as an AE, you want to be doing 10 to 20 demos a month. And if you back that out in terms of the numbers and in terms of your quota and in terms of a reasonable close rate, that's going to be really good. If you're doing 20 a month, back out that close rate to like 10%, even 10%, and you're going to be pretty good at 60 to 120K. Reps I've seen make 240 to 300 in a particular month. And so back that out in terms of what you need in terms of meetings to actually get those to be qualified. I don't know what that looks like for your particular business. I don't know what your top of funnel looks like. I don't know if it's inbound heavy, if it's outbound heavy, but you can work the numbers from there. I mean, it really does depend on the business, but yeah, you want to be at that deal size. You want to be doing 10 to 20 demos a month.
Yeah, great point. Pete, anything quickly to add as we kind of wrap this up?
Well, I mean, I think there's two ways of doing it. There's like the tops down approach, which is what Farland's saying, is like, what do you need? And I think that kind of is dependent on the ASP, the win rate, and the deal cycle, like he was saying. So if you need to have way more demos because your ASP is 5K as opposed to 50K, in Farland's example, then we got to be having way more demos, and that probably means, and then like how many unique accounts do we have to be interacting with what conversion rate on accounts and response rate on emails and calling in order to drive that. So the response to that is like, you got to do the math. And then the other way of doing it is bottoms up, which is like, all right, cool. Well, like that's how many do I need? But maybe another way to think about it is how much could I do, right? And that's like a bottoms up calculation of how many hours there are in the day, how long an email takes to write, how long a call takes to make. Are they doing their own prospecting, fumbling around in like Crunchbase or something like that? Or is somebody doing it for them and like identifying those accounts ahead of time, identifying the contacts ahead of time, loading those into the CRM, loading those into the Cadence tool such that part of their work is like removed. Okay, now like those 8 hours a day can be spent purely focusing on emailing and calling and doing social touches and what have you. So, if a thoughtful email takes 5 minutes to do, and maybe you do a thoughtful email once with a bunch of automated emails after that, pretty quickly you can get to some pretty big numbers. And so that's more like a Frederick Winslow Taylor approach, like time and motion. But I think you can do it, right?
Yeah.
I think the answer to the question is like, think about what the tops down is and do the math, and think about what the bottoms up is, short of driving somebody insane. Or actually it's bottoms up, but then if you're in the example, if you're an SDR and that's all the time you spend on that, cool. But if you're an AE and use Farland's metaphorical example where they're doing 20 new demos a month, would be 5 a week, and there's probably like 5 more meetings that are happening that are like second and third meetings within there. So that's 10 meetings a week, which then leaves maybe another 10 or 20 hours of like work time to do stuff. Well, if you only have like 5 or 10 hours of time to do prospecting, how much now still do bottoms up and say how much stuff can actually be done in that time, and then that would be the number, right?
Makes total sense. Yeah. Awesome. Well, I hope that answered your question, Jenna. That was awesome. That is our time today. I can't believe that was an hour. That went super quick. So I wanted to do a quick shout out to our sponsor today, DocuSign. Without our partners, we wouldn't be able to have these awesome discussions like this one. So if you do need a quick boost in productivity for your sales team, haven't checked out DocuSign, I would make sure that you do that. And Farland, Pete, thank you so much for your insights today. It was truly a pleasure. You guys are just a ton of knowledge. And thank you, everyone, for tuning in and being so engaged as well. Thanks for all the questions. But that's
great
a wrap.
question. Yeah, thanks. And if you need anything, you can reach out to me on LinkedIn. Thanks for the good questions.
I'm very easy to find. Farland's easy to find because of his first name. I'm really easy to find because of my last name.
Perfect. All right. Have a great rest of your day, everyone.